This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of An Expat's Russia. Today we're going to talk about some funny stories we've had crossing the Russian border. Marcus, do you want to start it off?
Sure. Yeah, there's one incident that comes to mind when I was, 2000, when was that? 2013 or so. Um, so when you have a visa in Russia, you need to make sure that you're out of Russia before the visa expires.
Visa
You
ends.
do not want to overstay your visa because you just, yeah, you could potentially be banned, right? For up to 5 years or deported. But in my case,
Highly unlikely, but it's
it is
possible.
very unlikely, and if you have a good explanation, like medical reason, that's you just prove your case. But most cases they'll just give you a fine and you'll leave. In my case, I got a train. So my visa was expiring Saturday, some Saturday, and I was like, okay, I need to be out by Saturday. So I booked a train from Moscow to Helsinki, but I didn't take into account that the train ride was 14 hours, and by the time I would get to the border, it'd be 4 a.m. the next morning. So my visa would have expired at 12, right? So I overstayed my visa by a couple hours, and so the great thing about the train is that when you're traveling, you don't have to stand in line at passport control or anything. They get on the train, and while the train's moving to the next in the neutral zone or to the next checkpoint, no, I guess it's to the next station. They will come through and check all the passengers' visas. So I gave him the documents, not thinking of anything. And I speak Russian, so that was definitely helpful. He's looking at it. He's looking at it, and obviously it's yesterday's date because it was early morning, and he's like, why are you, why didn't you leave yesterday, or why are you late, or something. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, your visa expired. And I was like, oh. And he saw that I realized it just now, and I was like, I booked the I was like I booked the I was explaining to him I booked the ticket, not thinking ahead of time that we were crossing the border the next day. And he's like, he wasn't like angry about it. Some border patrol guards would be like, oh great, more work for me. But he was like, he talked to his partner, and he's like, what do we do, like. And so they took me off the train at Viborg, the city right before going into Finland. They took me off the train. They made me wait and basically said, hey, you're going to pay a fine. I paid 1,000 ruble fine, and I was just chatting with the guys for the next train. They're like, we're going to take you off the train. You have to pay a fine. They didn't say how much at the beginning. And then there's going to be another train coming by, and you can hop on that train. And I will explain to the other train, guard or whatever. So I think I waited maybe 2 hours. I paid the fine, and I was just talking to them, and then the next train came. So the train that went from Moscow to Helsinki was the Lev Tolstoy.
So the nice
like,
one.
Yeah, it's 14 hours. But the next train that came was the Allegra, the fast train from St. Petersburg to Helsinki. And so I got on that train, and I actually got to Helsinki faster than the first train. And I didn't pay. I didn't pay for the ticket, and I had Wi-Fi on the Allegra train. So, I mean, that was don't overstay your visa, but if you know Russian for sure, you can kind of explain your case, and you'll.
Right.
I paid a fine on another case where I tried to enter Russia early, and I didn't know the date was one day later because the consulate made a mistake. But I paid I think $50 for that. So just make sure your visa dates are correct, and you follow that. Otherwise, if you don't know Russian, I don't know what any English speaker or non-Russian speaker would have done.
Sure, sure. Well, I would also say that we need to be very careful to specify right now that this isn't necessarily the standard experience. If you are trying to enter Russia before your visa starts, or you're leaving Russia after it's expired, there's a very high chance that you will encounter nasty people at the border who are not happy to see you and who will make your life miserable,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because it's very likely that if you're not a personable person and or you can't speak Russian and you're trying to leave Russia, your visa's expired, they're not going to put you on the night's train for free.
Yeah. Yeah. That was
So I think we should stipulate
exactly.
that.
So with Russians, what my experience has been that they're very, very strict in those formal situations, and then once you start talking to them again, if you can talk to them, then they can kind of warm up, especially if you have a legitimate reason. But in no circumstance should you plan that ahead and be like, oh, I'll just kind of get by, slide by.
Exactly.
You won't. But you had an interesting encounter at the border as well.
I've had two actually interesting encounters at the border. I'll actually start with one that you've never heard because I was thinking about it as you were telling this story. I was going from Moscow to Kiev on the train, and I was leaving Russia. Oh no, sorry, I was going from Kiev to Moscow on the train. So I was entering Russia. I left Ukraine. They checked for my visa. They're like, okay, he's got a Russian visa. We'll let him go. And then the way it works is, so they stop at the last town in Ukraine where you go across the border, but then the next stop is not for a few hours until you hit the next major town in Russia. So I'm in Russia, and then we get there, and the guy comes on, like you said, to check your visa. It's in the middle of the night, I think like 3 a.m. They had this little computer actually that they brought around. I don't know if they had that when
No, I've never seen
you
that.
got. So they were checking they were entering all of the information into their computer as they were checking everyone's passport. Anyway, they get to mine. This is 2013. So the 3-year visa hadn't been around that long for Americans. And I had a 3-year tourist visa. I'd already been in Russia with it. I wasn't entering the first time. But these border guards in the middle of nowhere, I'm sure there are very few Americans who were traveling on the train between Moscow and Kiev. Anyway, she gets my visa and she's like, tourist visa, 3 years. And she looks at me, and I spoke Russian as well. I didn't speak that well at this point, but I spoke enough. And she told me, не существует такой визы. Не существует. Я ни разу в жизни не видела. And she's like, I never saw a 3-year tourist visa. It's fake. And I was like, what? It's not fake. And then like this whole argument ensued, and they held the train up for over an hour. Like I had to get off the train and I had to go into this building, and I was sitting there, and they're like telling me like there's no such thing in this visa. And at the time I was like, but there is. The Russian consulate gave me this visa. I don't know what you want from me. And so it went on, and like again, they're holding up this train. Like everyone's late to their destination because my visa is fake.
Yeah.
And so we just sat there, and then they're just like, they made a couple phone calls, and then they're like, okay, хорошего пути. And then they just like let me go, and the train left. And I was like, what is this? This is ridiculous. The other story I have, I needed to leave Russia to do like what's called a border run, right? I needed to leave Russia and come back. Because actually my registration had expired, and I was taking a new job, and they were like, where's your registration? And I showed it to them. They're like, it's expired. We can't hire you like that. Anyway, this was in St. Petersburg. I got on the train. I needed to go to Estonia. That was the quickest border crossing to do. So I get on the train. Well, I went to buy the ticket rather. And the ticket to Ivangorod, which was the city on the border, was like 600 rubles from St. Petersburg. But Narva, the Estonian city, which is literally like
5-minute walk.
less than a kilometer away.
Across the border.
Yeah, 5-minute walk. The ticket to there was 3,000 rubles, so $50 or $10. And I was like, well, I'm just going to buy the ticket for $10. I'll walk across the border. Well, that sounds all great, but in Russia they have this thing called a приграничный город, and they have this приграничная зона, which is like I don't know, on the border zone, really is what it kind of translates to. But anyway, no one can go to these cities. They're closed cities unless you have authorization from the FSB to get off the train there, or you have your registration in this city. Can you get off there? Anyway, I show up, and they start checking everyone's passport. I'm like, we didn't even cross the border. I'm in Ivangorod. And they're like, где ваш пропуск? And I was like, What? What do you mean propusk?
Where's your pass?
I'm just getting off the train. Yeah, you have to have this special pass from the FSB called a propusk. And I'm saying, like, I don't have a propusk. What do you mean? Why do I need a propusk? I'm just going to Narva. And they're like, you can't get off the train here. So they take me off the train. There's actually like these gates in front of the, like when you get off the train, like in these little cities, usually it's just like free. You can just like walk off the tracks, right? But here, there was like this long gate and you had to like stay in there, and you went into a building, which was like a passport control area. And I was like, what the heck is this? Like, I bought an internal ticket. Anyway, I go to get in there and they're like, you can't get off here. I'm like, okay, well, I can get back on the train and continue on to Narva. And they're like, no, you can't. I was like, why can't I? And they're like, because you've already gotten off here. And I'm like, okay, but I can't be here, you told me. And they're like, yeah, you can't be here and you can't go further. And then this started, and they had me sit there for 4 hours. And they're like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? They took my passport and they came back and they would ask me, they would be like, why were you in Kenya? I see you were in Ethiopia. What were you doing in Ethiopia? And then they're like, you were in Lebanon. What were you doing in Lebanon? And I was like, it was just vacation. What do you want from me? 4 hours later, they came back and they're like, okay, you can go. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I get to Narva? And they're like, oh, you can just walk through Ivangorod. Don't worry. I'm like, wait a second. And he's like, yeah, we checked everything. You're okay.
Yeah.
You go ahead. You can walk across. And I was like, well, can I come back? Because I need my train is going back from Ivangorod.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd now
true.
missed it.
Yeah.
And so I'd missed that train. And they're like, oh, yeah, you can come back and you just ask for Volodya. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I crossed the border. I came right back. And this Volodya, he saw me. He's like, he just waved to me, and then like they just waved me through after they stamped the passport. And then I walked to the bus station and got a bus back to St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
But that's my story. You can't go to these cities on the border. I actually have another friend. He went to Anadyr, which is this city in the far east of Russia. He had a very similar story. He got off the plane, and they're just like, you can't be here. Where's your propos?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. He actually had to go to court.
Dang.
So
yeah,
there are funny stories at the Russian border, but you can't go to these border cities.
You know, knowing Russian, I'm thinking about the stories, my experience. Knowing Russian, you know, can save you in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. I should have said that I spoke exclusively Russian with them in both of these situations, and it was totally fine, which is very different than if you're driving in Russia and get stopped. If you speak Russian, you're in trouble.
Yeah. You just want to pretend, you know, make work for them, and then they'll let you go. But if they're in this, if you're in a place you can't be in, they're going to be really strict until you kind of soften them up with you know, getting to know them and asking them questions.
Well, it's always easy because they would ask a question like, what are you doing in Russia? And I'd be like, Мне очень нравится Россия. I really like Russia. And they're like, oh, okay. Хороший пацан.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, it always worked out. But again, not good ideas. But again, both of our stories came from just not knowing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Generally not knowing the answer. Can I do this? Can I do that? So it always pays to know in advance. Again, had I needed to do something, I got stuck at the border for 4 hours just sitting there. It was literally on a bench. It was terrible, actually. And they took my passport. They left me with my phone, thankfully, so I could do something. Yeah. But it was a long day.
So if you had any experiences getting in and out of Russia, similar to these, or, you know, just awkward situations, share in the comments below. I'm just really curious to see how many people have these types of situations, because these are kind of simple things to run into,
right?
But I don't hear many stories about it. So do share, and we'll see you in the next episode.
This was Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have a question about Russia, let us know in the comments. We'll answer it in the video.